Okay, we're in Exodus chapter 25. Hello, friends and neighbors. Well, here we are again. We're taking a look today at Exodus chapters 25 through 30. And as you know, since you've just read this section gives us the instructions for the building of the tabernacle. And to begin with, I want to direct your attention to chapter 25 and verse 9, where God says, "In accordance with all that I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it." It was important to God that the tabernacle was built according to the pattern that he gave to Moses. And that idea is repeated again in chapter 25 and verse 40. "See that you make this according to the pattern which is being shown you on the mountain." The most important word about this tabernacle or this sanctuary was that it was to be built according to the pattern that God would show Moses. Now, the word pattern signals the fact that the tabernacle would be a model or a pattern of the real thing. We might wonder why the tabernacle had to be built precisely according to the pattern that God gave. And of course, one reason is that this is God. And God has the right to tell us how he wants us to do things. He has a right to tell his people what he wants, precisely what he wants. And our job is to just to obey the pattern. But perhaps there's another reason why God gave this instruction. Perhaps the answer is that this tabernacle was the place that God would dwell among his people. The suitable abode for God would only be one that reflected the pattern given to Moses. And also, I think this is an early indication that the tabernacle is an earthly symbol of a greater heavenly reality. Consider this. There are two cherubim facing each other on the cover of the mercy seat. I guess I should say there are two cherubs. Cherubim is plural. For all of you English majors, that might be important to you. So we've got two cherubs who are facing each other on the cover of the mercy seat, the cover of the Ark of the Covenant. And by the way, cherubim are found throughout the design of the tabernacle. Now, cherubim, these are heavenly beings. And then this must surely be a sign that the tabernacle is a symbolic representation of God's heavenly dwelling. Again, the tabernacle is to be an earthly representation of the heavenly tabernacle. It's modeled after a higher cosmic reality, the dwelling place of God. And it also reflects the gradations of holiness on Mount Sinai. You remember that only a certain number of people could go up the mountain, and then only Moses could go to the top of the mountain. What we have in the tabernacle is a portable Mount Sinai, if you please, where only a few men could go into a certain section and only one man could go into the most holy place. So, if you will, the tabernacle is a portable Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. The tabernacle is a piece of holy ground in a world that has lost its way. Now, how might this apply to us today? I'm getting ahead of myself and I can't talk straight. We know from the New Testament that the church is the temple or the tabernacle of God today. God lives in us. So we could say that we are the piece of holy ground amid a world that does not know God. And that gives us worth and purpose. And may I add just here that indeed we may see ourselves as wearing on our foreheads the sign that was on Aaron's. What did it say? Holy to the Lord. That's who we are. And it tells us something about our purpose. Incidentally, speaking of Aaron, this was an interesting note to me that there were to be bells along the hem of Aaron's robe. I don't know that I remember that from previous study. It was almost a new revelation to me, bells on his robe. And imagine, they would jingle as he, the high priest, served in the tabernacle. And why the bells? Why was this important? We can only speculate. In fact, as we read through this text, we speculate about a lot of things, don't we? We'd like to have a lot more information than we have. But let's speculate. The bells would assure everyone who listened that Aaron, the high priest, had not died in the holy place, and that he continued to minister on behalf of the people. I think that's interesting. And another side note here, you'll notice that the worship in the Old Testament was certainly sensual, wasn't it? That is, there were smells, the sacrifices, the 2 burnt offerings that were offered in the morning and in the evening, and all the other sacrifices, a lot to smell. The light, the candlestick that was lit every night, hearing the bells. Interesting that the Old Testament worship was sensual in nature. It involved the eyes and the nose and the ears and so forth. And I don't think we should miss the contrast here between Old Testament worship and New Testament worship today, which is much more spiritual. It is less sensual. And that is a progression, isn't it? A progression in God's will. His worship began in a very sensual way, but it comes to the point where worship today is spiritual. It is of the heart. God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. John chapter 4. Anyway, back to the tabernacle. This is the place where God would dwell or live among his people. Now, God told Moses that above the mercy seat, or on the cover of the Ark of the Covenant, there I will meet with you. That's chapter 25, is it? Verse 22? I think that's right. Yes, 25 verse 22. There I will meet with you. The ark then is the focus of God's presence with his people. And take a look at chapter 29 verses 44 and 45, where God tells Moses some interesting information, that there the tabernacle is called a tent of meeting. I like that thought. The tabernacle was a tent of meeting. That is, this was the place where God would meet with his people and where they would meet with him. But in that text, chapter 29, we also learn that another reason God brought his people out of Egypt was so that he might dwell among them. And the point I don't want us to miss just here is that God wants to live with us. He wants to have a close relationship with us. And now, thanks to Jesus, we all have access to God. We all have access to that close relationship. Every Christian is a priest who can meet with God. How blessed we are to have such access to God. When in the Old Testament, only the high priest, only Aaron and his 4 sons, were to serve as priests in standing before God. That's chapter 28 and verse 1. But today, every Christ follower is a priest of God, able to go into the holy place and commune with God. Well, there is more we could say about the tabernacle, its furniture, the priests, and the offerings. Information on all of these topics is found in this text, but I think I'm going to stop just here. In our next section, we'll be reading about and discussing the rebellion of the people in the building of the golden calf. How quickly God's people forgot him and his law. How quickly we can forget, right? I hope to visit with you again next week, and until then, may God bless you richly.